All right. Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? I am Marina Anastasia Ozeroski, actually Marina Anastasia Ozeroski. I have to remember I have a new title. And I currently play a widowed Ukrainian noblewoman who lived between 1560 and 1600. I'm a member of the Order of the Laurel, as many of you know, and I was happily recognized for some research into Rus cooking, cooking research, and I believe embroidery. So you're kind of wondering, why did I pursue dumplings? So that falls into that Rus cooking research that I've done. I've spent a lot of years trying to figure out things because it's a lot. Late period Russian is, I don't find, as well documented as some of the earlier periods that we have. And dumplings, I loved stuffed food. I really do, from crepes and hand pies to my favorite, which is pretty much any stuffed pasta. I grew up eating dumplings, which in my family we call petaha, and I'm Ukrainian. Another word that I use that is easier for more people is vareniki. So if I were to bump into a Ukrainian on the street and say petaha, they would actually know what I'm talking about, but nobody else would. And what the rest of the world knows it as is pierogi, which is actually a Polish word. But the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Polish all have very similar food types. It's really kind of weird to be watching myself here. Like there's no faces. I'm like, are they making nods? So I've always wanted to research dumplings for the time periods that we play. And I was inspired by Meister and Siglinda, who did sausage research. And she just went right across all time periods, all countries, and just made all sausages. And I'm like, ooh, oh boy, I can like make all kinds of dumplings. Like, how cool is that? And she did that for a White Wolf Beyond Challenge. And on my third and most recent challenge, I challenged in with researching dumplings. And I wanted to determine if they were actually part of my persona's cuisine. Because there isn't really a lot of cookbooks or things that have come out of Russia or Poland. There's books on foodstuffs, there's books on the kind of ingredients they had, but not a lot of recipes or combinations. And for my research, I decided to keep it strictly to stuffed food that would have been boiled or steamed, aka dumplings. So my challenge was presented at Crown Tourney in October 2018. And as part of my research, I used my trip to Italy, where I got to sample lots of ravioli and other stuffed pastas. I also took a cooking class because I'd actually never made Italian pasta, though I've made vareniki all my life because I've been eating it since I could probably chew. And then I did manage to find a book, but actually I do have better ones here at home. The chronology of dumplings, they started in the East, and they're very early references to them. So in the 3rd century AD, they are credited with being created by a Chinese military strategist. And please forgive me for any mispronunciations on names. And I believe it's pronounced Zhuge Liang, and it's a version of Mantou. It's called Baozai, or Baizi. It had various types of fillings. The next reference we have is Mantou, is actually Jiaozi, and it is credited to being created by a Chinese gentleman named Shang Zhongjing, and he is a founder of Chinese herbal medicine, and apparently he invented them as earworms for the poor people. And he was born around 150 AD and pre-200 AD, that I'm thinking that they were actually created. And then in 225 AD, Mantou starts to become mentioned. And then we also have Mantou in 962 1127 being mentioned in China. There was also a Chinese medicine book created by Yinshang Zhangqiao, and sorry, that's the name of the book, and the author is Sihui, and that is dated to 1330. I don't have any copies of these books, I just have references to this. And then we start seeing sort of a plethora of mentions of dumplings and getting recipes of them when we start getting into the 14th century. And one of the earlier reference we have is actually from the form of curry in England, and it's called tartlets. And there's, we all think when we hear tartlets, it's tarts, but when you look at the recipe, it's taking a meat and creating little meatballs and then enrobing it in a dough and boiling it in a broth or water. In Du Fait de Cuisine, 1420, we have something called renole, sorry. My pronunciation is really stinky tonight, so my apologies. And I don't actually have that cookbook yet. That one's on a list to be bought. And then we get in 1465, the Libro de Arte Cocinera by Martino de Como. There's 5 recipes for ravioli in that book. And it's also showing up in cookbooks in Central Asia and Middle East. There is something called Karname. It's called the Manual. It's a Persian cookbook, which has 2 recipes for something called Jashpada. And then there's 1 recipe for Monty, which is just another name for, and everything's shaped a little bit differently too, but I'm going to get into that in a little bit. We have ravioli come up in 1533 in Das Kochbuch, der Sabrina Wesslerin. And we have something called Shish Barak, and that's 15th century Arabic cookbook from Damascus called Kitab al-Tibaka. And that's a Lebanon, Syrian, Jordan, Hejaz area, northern Saudi Arabia and Palestine area. And then we can go into another mention of Monty, which is the Ottoman Empire, but it's mid-15th century. And then a more Monty come up as another reference. And then we have something, just dumplings, which is circa 1550 from the Domestroy. And the Domestroy has 2 meat and references to 2 meat dumplings and just dumplings. There's just 3 references to dumplings. Okay, I see me too, but I don't know what the question was.
I just was putting in the chat that I love everyone is doing crafts while watching. It's pretty cool, yeah.
And then we have tortelli finally being mentioned in 1570 in Italy from Scapi. So you can see we kind of go from 3rd century AD all the way up to 1570. But what I don't have from the Rus is actually the name of what did they call them. The translation is just dumplings. There are some things that names that don't come into use until much later. Pelmeni, which is a meat stuffed dumpling, shows up in the 17th century, so the 1600s in Russia. And pierogies are not actually even used as a term until 18th century in Poland. And there's gyoza, which is post-1946 in Japan. But they're thinking that that is a word that they learned from China during the war. And it's a variant of gyoza, which was founded or created in early 3rd century AD. Every culture has some form of dumpling that is stuffed. When I was looking at things, there's just, you can just go on the web and say stuffed dumplings, and you're going to get a whole list of all these cool things. So what they use in it, pretty well everything. The most common ingredients in the dumplings are actually meat, usually pork or veal or lamb, and it's ground up fine. They're adding eggs and herbs and sometimes maybe something else is a little bit of a binder, a bit of spicing as well. And then they're robing it in a very thin dough that they've rolled out, pinching it, they're making different shapes. And then they boil it either in water, which is really rare. Most times they boil it in a broth. So either a chicken or a beef broth that they're boiling in, or even a vegetable broth. So for example, I have here the baozi had various fillings. The gyozi had meat and minced vegetables. The meats were pork, beef, chicken, or fish. The tartelettes from the form of curry use pork. The ravioli from Martino is a mixture of cheese, pork, veal, or they will actually make, we've seen them on cooking shows, egg ravioli. So there's reference to actually making egg ravioli in Martino. And the Josh Pura was pork as well. The shishbark was ground meat and spices cooked in a yogurt sauce. Monty are usually ground lamb with a chickpea mixture, and they're served in a yogurt or garlic sauce. And tortelli was cheese. The dumplings in the Doma story don't really mention what they're stuffed with. So do I have any questions at this point?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I have one. When did they start? So I grew up, my best friend is Polish, so I grew up with pierogies. So, and making pierogies. When did they start boiling, then frying them? Or is that really, really modern?
That's more modern. From what I can tell, every now and again I come across a reference of frying the dough, but that's before it's boiled. So it's just another cooking methodology.
Okay, because in India they fry dumplings, but I was just curious.
I have an Indian cookbook here, and I looked through it for any type of stuffed dumpling and didn't come across any reference, and it's the 13th century, so there's no mention of anything, any kind of dumpling coming out of India at that point. That's not to say it's not being made, because what I discovered in my research is it's 3rd century AD, and it seems to skip an area, and all of a sudden it appears in Italy, or it appears in an English cookbook. And then the German cookbook picks up. And the recipes are all very, very, very similar in how they're doing it, how they're making it. And, okay, could they have been made independently? I don't think so. I think there's a case to show that it was brought from the East into the West, and people adapted it and then started making their own versions. Because as we all know, you can put anything you want into anything that's stuffed. Any pie can take any filling if we look at it that way as well. Any other questions or comments?
Anya says that the frying probably started as a reheating process.
Possibly. Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, everything's good in butter, right? Or pork fat. I'm all for that. So some of the books that I've used, we're talking about ingredients. So, oh yeah, one thing I wanted to note is the doughs, for whatever I've read, is basically it's a basic dough. Flour, water, and salt is the most basic. Sometimes people would add oil. Sometimes people would add egg. I like to use egg because I find it gives a more pliable, stretchier dough, and I can manipulate it a little more and a little better. But some of the books that I've referred to have been the Neapolitan Recipe Collection, which is by Terence Scully. It is really similar to Martino. The recipes are pretty much the same. And last year's calendar, the 2020 calendar, if you've purchased it, the July recipe is actually ravioli from that book. And for the Ukrainian ones, I just use my Ukrainian cookbooks, but I've been making them since I can remember, probably 5 or 6 years old. I've been making them, and I enjoy really making a lot of fruit ones. I have just recently acquired a Persian cookbook, the Manual by Babarchi, and it has quite a few recipes in it that I'm looking forward to trying here at home. I also
Are there medieval versions of fruit-filled dumplings? Like, I know there's closed rissoles, but I think those are fried, not boiled.
I haven't seen any recipes. They're almost all meat, ground meat, forced meat, and cheeses.
Right.
And the only unusual one that I really caught sight of was the Italian one that was egg ravioli. They also have recipes where they cook stuff to make it look like ravioli, but it's not a ravioli because it's not, they've just shaped it. They've cut it out square.
Like gloves? I think it's called gloves.
It was in Martino. I have to go back.
Okay.
I didn't mark that actual recipe. But my Martino right now is one of my favorite cookbooks. The Persian cookbook I'm looking forward to using this summer. It's just got all kinds of fun stuff that I can use up. Scheherazad's Feasts as well, Foods in the Medieval Arab World, has some very interesting recipes and some good references to different types of dumplings. But if you're wanting to go after sort of Polish Ukrainian, any good sort of Baba's cookbook, they call them the Ukrainian Daughters cookbook, anything like that, or traditional cuisine for Poland or Ukraine or Russia, you will find recipes for many different types of dumplings. So for example, and I know we do it in Ukrainian, Vareniki is usually for cheese or fruit-filled cooking, and we have something called pierogi, which is very close to pierogi, but it's pierogi. It usually takes a meat filling, and pelmeni in Russia are actually filled with meat as well. And they have a number of different things. And the folds are all different too. So each dumpling has a different way of being the dough manipulated. And we're all familiar with sort of the crescent of the pierogi, but all of the other dumplings, if you think of dim sum, the steamed dumplings there, each one's folded a little bit differently, and you can do that with your own little dumplings as well. So preparation. Do a lot of people, I can't say I want to see a show of hands, but I don't know if I can see chat. I can, and I was wondering if you can just sort of say yes. Do a lot of people make this at home? Have people made pierogies for themselves, or do they usually just buy them from the grocery store? See, Andy says yes. Penn says not yet. Oh, there's
I haven't made them in years. It's been a long time because of the effort to get a little bit of dumplings.
The best way to make pierogies is with a bunch of people. Just have a really good time and drink wine or whatever you want. That's how we make pierogies every fall. We make lots and lots and lots and freeze them. And oh my, they're so much better.
When I made them for Crown Tourney, and I made over 400. And Diane came over to help me get the lunch ready. So I had some other things on the go because I couldn't just feed everybody dumplings, right? And I was still making them up, and she was watching me make them, and she couldn't believe how fast that I was going through them. I can make approximately about it's about a minute per for me. Sometimes I can get it going faster, so I can sometimes do about 40 and 30 minutes, but usually it's 1 per minute or just a little bit under. Depends if I'm fighting my dough. Ravioli, yes, and not other dumplings. Awesome. So everybody's had a bit of experience at this, so that's really great. One of the things I like to do is prepare my filling the day before and put it in the fridge. And then when I take it out, depending what I have, if it's a potato and cheese, I roll it into little balls. I don't just keep scooping up with the spoon. If it's a fruit filling, then if it's something that needs to be drained, I let it drain so I can add some flour or something to it the next day. And but be prepared, as many of you know, and as I think it was Leslie mentioned, get together with a bunch of friends to make up a huge batch, because it really does go a lot more quickly when you have a lot of people around. But be prepared to spend maybe 1 to 2 hours just making up a good batch, because your dough often makes up close to 100. You just have to balance out what your fillings are that are going in there. And as you know, you can freeze them right away, or you can boil them and devour them almost immediately. So I did takeout this week, and these are, I want them to slide off the plate. These are some Monty from the Persian restaurant up the street. They're like little there we go, that's better. Little triangular packages, and they're sliding. These were served over chickpeas with a sauce and a yogurt sauce on top of them. And I also have a video of me making them with some instructions. If Michelle wants to take over and put that video up for us, that'd be great.
All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great.
Okay, take your dough round, stretch it a little bit, take enough filling so that it doesn't overflow or make it too much. So in this case, I'm using about 4 cherries because my dough is pretty stretchy. Put it in the center, and then take the center pieces of your round and pinch them together at the top, and then pinch at the bottom corner and pinch lightly up. And then take the other side and do the same, starting at the bottom, working your way up to the top, and then re-pinch the entire seam to make sure you've got any little gaps or holes that are showing up. And there you go, voila, very simple. Thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
So one thing that I don't actually talk about in that video, and I caught myself doing it, is my thumb. It pushes in. So when I'm holding the dumpling in this hand, this thumb taps the filling on the inside. Even, it doesn't matter what I've got in there, my thumb always taps and pushes it in a little bit so that I can get that pinch. I've become very adept at pinching my dough so that it comes over the filling, and I keep the filling out, because as a child, I don't know how many I had explode on me. A lot. My Baba would get us helping her making them, but she'd spend an afternoon making them up for our supper that night. My dad would come home from work and we'd all sit down to a meal of potato, because that was his favorite. Mine was strawberry, but that's how they got me to eat things, because they gave it to me sweet. They put sugar on top of it with cinnamon. And then eventually I moved to the sour cream and sauce. One of the great things for serving, and I had never done this in my life until I made my calendar recipe last year, and I experimented with it. So one of the pictures shows the, one of the images shows the dumplings just on a plate, this one here, and we tried it with just some cheese, and then I put it into a beef broth, and that made they just popped. I would happily serve them in a beef broth again and again, and those were a ravioli, an Italian ravioli. They're just simply amazing. So I hope you get a chance to try anything that you make sometime in a broth, because it's very yummy.
There's a question.
Sure.
Is there a desired size for a dumpling, or to just adjust the filling to the dough size?
You adjust the filling to the dough size. You don't want to have too much in it, because it's very hard to close an overstuffed dumpling. If the filling gets between the dough that you're trying to seal, it will open up when you cook it. Steaming obviously isn't as dangerous as boiling, because then you end up with filling all over the inside of your pot and you end up with a huge mess. So I usually use about I think a 2-inch round, and I like it. That's the way I tend to pull my dough just a little bit to give me something a little bit bigger to work with. And usually if I'm rolling stuff, I'm using about probably a teaspoonful, but like the ball when it's done is about maybe 1.5 centimeters in diameter. And then once I roll it, then I kind of flatten it so it's a little more oval and tubule, because it's easier once it's along the flat side of the pierogi or reniki to squish all of your dough around it. And then you can actually push a little bit on the dough to make it fill out the center of the pierogi. If you're making bigger ones, obviously you're going to make the filling a little bit bigger. You're going to use more of it, maybe 1/2 tablespoon to a tablespoonful of filling to go into the center. And when it's fruit, it's all based on the size of the fruit that you're putting in there. And if you're doing fruit, make sure you have some cornstarch or something in there that helps absorb the juices. They will go flat, whereas a cheese or like the cheese ones will usually hold shape decently. Potato obviously will always hold its shape and give you a really good bite when you bite into it from a pierogi point of view. Ravioli, the meat just helps it keep its shape. So again, you want something that doesn't you don't want just dough. You want to get the bite with the filling. So it is a bit of a judgment call. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Are there other questions?
Nope. You're
It was
very
really
clear.
Well, when I've offered this before, it's been, is this just unfilled dumplings? Yes, it is. It's not on the type of dumplings that you drop in on top of a pot and boil. This is my white wolfie on research that I was doing. I'm seeing comments and things come up on the across the screen now because I'm not reading my other computer, which is below this.
Is your fruit blanched or steamed or jammed before you put it in your dumpling?
No, it's usually fresh. So I macerate the fresh fruit a little bit. If it's not fresh, I've used jarred cherries, and I've had to really let them drain. They take about 2 to 3 days to get most of the juice out of them, because I really don't want something that wet going into the dough, because it takes so long to make up 30 to 40. You don't want the dough getting goopy, for lack of a better word, and sticking to whatever sheet you have down. Like I usually use parchment paper, and then keep a tea towel over top of them to help keep them from drying out, because they'll crack if they dry out too much. So I'll put a bit of cornstarch. When I could eat gluten, I used flour to help. Fresh fruit gets sugar to macerate it. Just anything, again, to help absorb some of the moisture. I think my grandmother also used to add flour to her fresh fruit. Just a little bit, just to help it not be too juicy in the water. And those things could explode really well. You'd have pink water.
If you put dried fruit in, would they just swell and explode the dough?
I don't know. I've never tried it, but we don't tend to use dried fruit in dumplings. It's
I'm
usually
just
fresh or frozen,
yeah.
or meat or potatoes or vegetables with herbs. I've done sauerkraut, and I've made mushroom ones.
There's just so many
ones,
medieval meatball recipes that have the dried fruit in them. So I was just wondering if that would.
If it's mixed with meat, I don't think it would explode, because it's enrobed, right? So the water's not really passing through the dumpling. It's actually cooking the dumpling on the outside. It's cooking the dough. It would be a fun experiment.
Anya has some good points here on the side. Is this just on filled dumpling? Oh, we got that. Do you ever use a pierogi press or something of the sort?
No, I don't need to. I'm really a good pincher.
And they say that they use almond flour and add that to the juicy fruits.
Ooh, that'd
Right?
be fun to do. Yeah, that would be a good idea. I have to be careful though. I have people in my life who have nut allergies, and if I'm making it for them, I can't really do that. I have successfully made gluten-free dumplings, and the flour I used was the Irresistibles brand, but I haven't done it in a few years. And I find that a lot of companies will change their formulas so that I'm actually, what works one time may not work as nicely the next time. Yes, dried apricots that have been reconstituted would work nicely too. They're a bit sweeter. I know a lot of people like blueberry. You'll see a lot of blueberry ones. I've made peach. Traditionally in Russia, you'll have plum and cherry. My grandmother, they had a strawberry farm, which is why I grew up eating strawberry vareniki.
Okay, I just asked them if they wanted to unmute because they had so many good points. And they have more mic or camera, that's why I'm muted. So then they can't ask themselves. Okay. No mic. Oh, okay.
Evelyn's raised her hand.
Oh, Excellency.
I'm just gonna go on camera, and His Excellency is here too. And His Excellency was commenting you made a dumpling with.
Yeah, I think when we did Border Spat Feast with MLO, I think I made a spiced beef and currant stuffed ravioli.
Was that from Scappy? Or?
Probably from Scappy. I'd have to check. But I have a theory that they might have used leftover from other dishes to fill ravioli. So I probably pulled it from another dish and filled.
I remember
Okay.
they were yummy though.
How did you find the dried fruit work? Did it, because somebody had asked if it would explode?
No, I think it was fine. Because it's cooking in the meat. So it just adds little bursts of
kind of partially
sweetness,
rehydrated,
yeah.
but not enough that it was like squishy.
Mm-hmm. The other one that I made was like a pea and ricotta, I think.
Have you gotten a gluten-free dough to work this way?
I haven't tried it in a while, but I'm kind of getting envious of all the people that I'm giving Vareniki to. So, and it's coming up on strawberry season, so you know. I want to make some, yeah.
How long do they cook for?
Normally people say they cook till they float, but sometimes they float really fast and they're still doughy in the middle. So I kind of eyeball it, but I'm thinking usually anywhere from, once they come to the top floating, about 1 to 2 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. Sometimes I'll fish one out and I will cut it to see if the dough on the inside has been cooked. Often I will wait until they get quite puffy. You can notice that the dough will puff up. And once they're puffy, they're really close to being finished. You could probably fish them out 30 seconds after you see them puff. But it's always a call. If you're really in doubt, take one out. Just like, if sometimes you take the steak off the barbie, you can give it a quick little nip to say, oh, okay, are you cooked far enough or not? You can do the same with your Vareniki. And when you do throw them into a bowl, because you're cooking a large batch, make sure you're adding a little bit of butter or oil or whatever you can stomach, just to help keep them from sticking together, because as soon as they stick together, they rip apart.
Are your fillings cooked in advance? Like meat fillings cooked in advance?
No, the meat fillings are not cooked in advance. The meat fillings are raw. The potatoes are cooked in advance, and I usually use 4 large baking potatoes and a block of extra old cheese, salt and pepper, and really finely diced onion. And the onion's been sauteed up, so I cook up the potatoes, mash them, and then I saute up the onions and caramelize them a bit, and then pitch them in with the potatoes, and then I put the shredded cheese, salt, not a lot of salt because it depends on the cheese, and pepper. And it's always a good idea when you're making these things just to over season just a little bit, because the flour will absorb some of the salt out of the filling.
Cool. If you're doing large batch for a feast, do you have any tips?
Don't do them all the week before. 400 is quite exhausting to make the week before. Figure that you're giving people, depending if it's a feast or a lunch, you're usually going about, I think I factored in 4 per person because I did a variety of 4. So I made the same amount in every single type that I made. And it was a crown turkey, so I made a lot of extras because you always want to factor in as well breakage. You might not quite get your pinch, or there might have been a crack. It might have stuck a little bit when you take it out and you rip a little hole in it. Once it's frozen, you can't repair the hole. There are ways of repairing holes with dough. It's very tricky, and it's not always guaranteed to work. I make them in advance and freeze them, put them in Ziploc bags. Try not to bang them around. You don't want them breaking once they're frozen. Make sure you've got your water up to boiling. Like we did steamed and boiled dumplings. We took up a lot of stove space, a lot of stove real estate at that event. Luckily, the feast cook was very willing to share, and I was out of her way with the stove by the time she needed it.
Cool. How many can you do in a pot at the time? Just it depends on the volume of water, or is there like a
Yes,
An
yeah,
upper
and you
limit,
don't
okay.
want them overcrowded because you don't want them sticking together. So it all depends on the pot size and how deep you have your water. You should use a wooden spoon, not metal, to stir them. You just give them a little stir to help break them apart and to gently, hopefully they're not sticking to the bottom of the pot. Because remember, when you're adding those frozen items in, you're reducing the boiling point of the water and it has to come back up to a boil again. And frozen ones do take longer to cook than your fresh ones, freshly made, like the ones you've just made.
Can you make them using rice paper or a rice dough, do you think? Would that be a way of getting around the gluten problem?
I
Or
haven't
you'd have to
tried
steam it.
Yeah, those would be steamed because yes, you can do them. It'd be like dim sum. I know people use cheaters and they will use wontons.
Yeah, but that's still not rice.
No, I actually do make up my dough with 1-to-1 ratio, I think was when I was making them. And I was experimenting a lot and I learned to detest Robin Hood flour, the gluten-free brand. I found that it crumbled, it didn't hold together, I couldn't get it pinched, it broke too much on me, and I found that I had a pliability with the Metro brand Irresistibles.
Cool.
But I want to try the Bob's Old Mill. And just experiment with some of the various gluten-free flours that I'm seeing in the stores right now. Because every now and again I come across a new one. Hard part there too is that they're now adding a self-rising agent in with the gluten-free flours, Michelle.
Oh, yeah, that wouldn't help with dumplings.
Nope. Don't make it out of coconut flour. Coconut flour won't work.
No. You'd make a
Tried
big
it.
steaming pot of coconut milk.
Yeah, I've tried it. It doesn't work.
I think chickpea flour you might have a chance.
Possibly, yeah. It's going to change the flavor of things. So you'd have to really season
Oh, yeah.
your whatever you're putting in there. You really want it to complement. So I'd probably using a meat in with the chickpea, kind of going for the whole flavor of a Monty versus, and then that would be steamed.
Was there any big surprises for fillings when you were going and bouncing around times and places? Was there anything really neat or really gross that you found?
No, I think I've been fascinated by the egg ravioli since I've seen it on the cooking shows on TV. And I think it was really interesting to see that they were making it in period in Italy with an egg yolk. And I know how difficult it is to handle an egg yolk and not break that thing. And I can't imagine pinching around it without breaking the egg yolk. I have a feeling if I tried to make it, it'd be a huge, huge mess. I'd be very
And it was like, so you could cut it open and the whole egg yolk would be there?
Yes.
And it, using a cooked one, not a raw one that would cook while you...
No, you're using a raw egg yolk and you're putting it onto your ravioli dough. And then you're draping it with another piece of dough, pinching down the edges, and then very gently lifting that into your pot of boiling water and cooking it very gently. And then when you open it up, you basically it's supposed to be a runny egg yolk.
Could they have been using a tray? Like, the modern ravioli trays where it's got the little divot in it?
I'm not familiar with that.
So you can buy their little indented trays that have the pattern for ravioli.
Okay, yes,
and then you lay the dough over top to get your flat.
Like a mold.
Kind of like a mold. So I wonder if they had something like that so that the egg doesn't run everywhere.
I don't know. We'd have to research Italian cooking dishes. I think Scappy might talk about something like that, possibly. I'd have to look at him.
Scappy has some great drawings of the things he had in the kitchen. So you might find something there too if he doesn't describe it.
Yeah, should add that to my research because that's a really great comment. I'm gonna have to write all of this up someday.
Do you have your recipe written out anywhere?
Which one? My ravioli?
Yeah, or the Vernicky, or...
Okay, so the Verenicky one was published And it's October. And it's there it is in all its glory. It's October.
Yay, I have that.
And the ravioli one that I've done is this one.
2020, yeah.
Yeah. And there it is in July. It's coming up if you have that calendar. So those are the only two places that I've published it. I should probably write them up into my blog because I do have a blog. I'm just really far behind on all of my blog entries and updates. But that's an idea. I could put them right in there. Is that something people would like to see?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Oh, now someone wants me to do the egg one. Okay.
No, I really want to try the egg one.
Yeah.
Isabel would like you to type them up too.
Okay.
I wonder if,
I guess I'm going to have to get my blog updates going.
I wonder how fresh the eggs were, or if they were a couple weeks old, because the egg yolk of a couple week old egg is stronger than if you get a fresh egg. Everything sticks together, whereas if it's an older egg, so you might want to try both.
I was thinking if you put the egg yolk back and forth a bit, the sticky outside comes off, and it might not stick and tear in the same way. Because that's what you do when you're making tempura, or not tempura, tempura paint. Tempura paint?
Right, yeah. I even could put that on a paper towel, but boy, it's hard to get it off of there and not rip it.
It wouldn't be a bulk thing, I don't think.
I'm actually just opening up Martino here, trying to get myself to the recipe. It says break some fresh eggs. So they're referring to, I would assume, like day old or that day egg yolks.
Also not cooked, like it could be fresh in that way. And translations are rough that way.
Yep, and they're saying to, once you have the egg yolk on the dough, then you are topping it with sugar and sweet spices with a little salt. They like to put cinnamon and sugar on everything.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
Everything.
Hey, let's be honest, so does Starbucks.
Who said that?
That would be Her Excellency, who is a Starbucks fiend.
There we go.
Very true. So if that's everything, I'm just going to stop the recording then.